Hello, hello. So I'm going to start this presentation from the beginning. So if you miss class, you can watch it. If you already have the beginning of these notes, obviously you can zoom through the video where you need to catch up. But I am going to try and be as quick as possible and pause the video where you need to fill out your guided notes. All right, so we're going to be learning about the nervous system. This is one of my favorite units. So here we have Your Amazing Brain. We read this in class, and pretty much everyone in the class could read it. And it's a phenomenon that as long as you know the first and the last letter, your brain will fill it in. And next up. So what is the nervous system? The nervous system is a system of cells, tissues, and organs that regulate the body's responses to internal and external stimuli. This can be divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So we'll go over that in detail in a bit. So what life process does the nervous system carry out for the body? So remember, in the characteristics of life unit, our body always wants to maintain homeostasis, and that is so that we can live. So the nervous system carries out for the body regulation. And now I want you to think about in this next question, what cell organelle carry out the same life process in a single-celled organism? So the nucleus is for a single-celled organism like the nervous system is for the human body. They're using that as an analogy. Next up. So here we have the central nervous system is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. So two things, easy to remember. The peripheral nervous system is all the nerves outside the brain and the spinal cord, and it can be divided into the somatic and autonomic. Then the peripheral nervous system, so everything that's not the brain or spinal cord, is split up into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. So this controls involuntary muscles like smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. So that would be your digestive system and your heart. The somatic nervous system controls voluntary muscles like your skeletal muscles. So your movement, your arms, your legs, all those things that you control. All right, here now we have the human brain, one of my favorite topics. So the brain is a large mass of neurons located in the skull that controls and coordinates most of the activities of the body. It is separated into two sides. So it's separated by what's called the corpus callosum. You have your left hemisphere, your right hemisphere, which are connected by the corpus callosum. Okay, so a lot of you may have heard the term, some people say, oh, I'm more left-brained or I'm more right-brained. So I shared with the class, obviously I am more left-brained, because I love math and science, that's what I'm stronger at. I'm very analytical, not as strong at writing and art. And I told the class, my sister is more right-brained. She's very, very talented at art, a UC Davis art major. And she also minored in art history. Some of you actually may have more of a balance between the right and left brain. So everyone is different. And I believe that you can go online and take a test to see if you're more right-brained or left-brained. Okay, so there's three parts of the brain. We have the largest part of the brain called the cerebrum, and this controls voluntary activities such as thinking, learning, reasoning, memory, and motor skills. So I also shared when my brother crashed and he's had 6 brain surgeries, he hit the frontal lobe of the cerebrum. And so he does experience short-term memory loss. He does have a shorter temper, so controlling his temper, which might have to do with reasoning. And then also he had to learn how to move all his arms and legs again. He had to learn how to brush his teeth, everything, chew, swallow. So all his motor skills, cognitive skills, he had to relearn. Okay. The next part of your brain is the cerebellum, and this coordinates muscle movement, helps keep your balance. So if you have any damage towards your cerebellum, you might notice you have some balance issues. I shared with the class when I worked at UC Davis emergency room. If we had like a younger person come in with balance issues, that could simply be due to an ear infection or something going on with your inner ear, or they would do a CT scan to see if there was anything that they could see going on with your cerebellum. Okay, next up is your medulla or your brainstem, which controls breathing. Very important. So this is responsible for involuntary activities like breathing, heart rate, peristalsis. which is your digestion and blood pressure. Okay, so now we're going to go over stimulus and response because your nervous system has a lot of nerves in it, which are triggered by stimulus. So this is any change in your internal or external environment that causes a reaction to occur. This includes light. Sorry, if you hear kids yelling at me, we're at swim practice. Yes, William. Oh, I don't know what he's yelling for. Okay. Light, sound, pain, chemical levels, and body temperature. You might be thinking, how is a stimulus like chemical levels? I want you to think of like an adrenaline rush, or if you have really high anxiety, you might actually be releasing cortisol in your brain. So when you're really stressed out, your body actually, your chemical levels of cortisol go up. Response, a reaction to the stimulus, so a physical movement or chemical hormone being released from a gland. So basically your chemical levels would be increased from the anxiety or stress, and then the actual chemical hormone would be the cortisol as an example. Okay, here's an example of a stimulus being like a hot burning pan, and then your response, obviously naturally with your nerve reflex, you will respond with removing your hand. So without the nervous system, this reaction wouldn't be possible for your protection. So we have receptors and effectors, cells in the body which pick up stimuli or sense organs. Then we have specialized organs that are designed to produce a response, including muscles and glands. Next up, cells of the nervous system. So we have a neuron. And thank you, Audrey had bought me a necklace or hat with a little neuron. I am going to wear that to class. So thank you, Audrey. So a neuron is a nerve cell designed to transmit electrochemical messages, impulses from receptors to effectors throughout the body. Yes, William, I'm making a video. Come here. He just got out of the pool for swim. So these are essential because they allow direct communication between the cells of the body. I love neurons. Okay, so the neuron structure. So we have these super cool things called dendrites. They almost look like branches on the outside of the neuron, and they are surrounding the cell body. So the dendrites receive and conduct electrical impulses. So this part of the dendrite is going to line up with, like, these are going to line up back to back. So if I had another dendrite, these would be on this. We'll go over a better graphic of this. Okay, and then there's the soma. The cell body contains the nucleus, cytoplasm, and other organelles. So here we have the soma. Okay, next up we have the axon, which is the long, thin fiber down here that extends from the cell body and conduct impulses away from the cell body to another neuron. Then we have our terminal branches, which are these little guys right here. So these terminal branches are going to line up to the dendrite of the next neuron. So the ends of the axon, which secrete chemicals called neurotransmitters. So I literally had a class at UC Davis. If you major in neurobiology like I did, we had an entire class on just neurons and neurotransmitters and action potential. So like how neurons work and how they communicate and how they function within the nervous system. Okay, so then we have the myelin sheath. What is really interesting about the myelin sheath? It's a fatty substance that surrounds and protects the neuron, insulates it, and helps the impulses travel faster. So when I was working at Genentech, these myelin sheaths, we noticed we had actually mice with dementia and Alzheimer's. And when we were doing our research, we found that over time, as the mice, their dementia got worse, the myelin sheath around the axon actually deteriorated and would ruin and destroy the axon, which basically would kill the neuron cell. So basically dementia is a deterioration of your nervous system, and it starts with the myelin sheath in a lot of our research is what we found. So we were trying to make drugs, well, prescription drugs that hindered, like stopped the deterioration of the myelin sheath and protected it so that the person wouldn't progress with their disease. The nodes of Ranvier gaps in the myelin sheath. So here it's the gaps between the myelin sheath. The signal jumps from node to node called saltatory conduction. So you're going to notice there's going to be electrical activity along the axon, and then the chemical activity in the neuron is within the neurotransmitter. How do neurons send messages? Oh, here's our lovely neurotransmitter, and we're going to talk about the electrical versus the chemical. So messages are transmitted electrochemically because it does both. Electric impulse will only occur when the neuron reaches a specific voltage, and the chemical impulse is carried from one neuron to the next by chemicals called neurotransmitters, as I had mentioned earlier. So the terminal branches of a neuron carries a signal from one neuron to another. And obviously this happens extremely quickly. And this is why you can respond so quickly, or you have so many involuntary neuron actions you don't even know are happening. Okay, so it's electric. At rest, a neuron has voltage of minus millivolts, minus 70 millivolts. There are more negative ions outside the cell than, or sorry, inside the cell than outside. I'll show you a diagram as well. So once the voltage reaches positive 30 millivolts, the neuron is fired. So it shoots down that axon. And the impulse travels from the dendrites. So remember those branches around the cell body. So they travel from the dendrites down the axon to the terminal branches where the neurotransmitter is. So you're going to go from your electrical signal to a chemical signal. So that's why they call it electrochemical. The voltage changes when protein channels located along or located within the axon open and allow ions to move. When this voltage has changed, we say that's an action potential has occurred. If you take a college biology class, you will do a lot of, well, we did a lot studying action potential among nerves. Okay, so this is showing the charge moving down the axon. And you can see on the top here, the negative charge moving, and on the bottom, outside versus inside, the charge moving down the axon for the electrical signals. So here we are in response to a signal, the soma end of the axon becomes polarized. So the soma is the cell body. The depolarization spreads down the axon. Meanwhile, the first part of the membrane is repolarizing. So this is preparing for another action potential or electrical signal to be sent. Because the sodium channels are inactivated and the additional potassium channels have opened. So if you aren't familiar with chemistry yet, Na positive is sodium and K positive stands for potassium. The membrane cannot depolarize again. The action potential continues to travel down the axon. Okay, so this is just showing how that action potential works. So we have the threshold, this is the peak. And here we have our plus 30 millivolts, and then I can't see it on my screen because of Zoom, but down low is minus 70 millivolts. And you can see the sodium and potassium ions moving around in this diagram. Okay, and that was zoomed into the axon. So all neurons are separated from one another by a small piece called the synapse. So this is our neurotransmitter being released to the dendrite of the next cell. When the action potential reaches the terminal branches, so it goes from the axon to the terminal branches, vesicles filled with neurotransmitters, so now we're doing our chemical response, are released, which float across the synapse and bind to receptors on the dendrites of the next neuron. Once the neurotransmitters have done their job, they are either broken down by enzymes or taken back up into the terminal branches through reuptake proteins. So basically, it's like a recycling system of the neurotransmitters, and it'll keep using them. Okay, so I tried to click on this yesterday, and the neurotransmitter animation wasn't working for some reason. So this is the reuptake program or reuptake protein. So you guys remember from the cell organelle unit, we learned about vesicles. These are little neurotransmitters. They're going to be released here, and then they're going to be received by the receptor of the dendrite of the next neuron, send an impulse signal. So this is your chemical signal. And then those neurotransmitters will be released, and the reuptake protein will then recycle the neurotransmitters, which I find really interesting. So it's very efficient. So we're going to label our synapse and so here we have our terminal branch, B, the reuptake protein right here, our dendrite, vesicle, neurotransmitter, and receptor, as I mentioned in the diagram before. Okay, so there are many different types of neurotransmitters, and each can cause different responses. You may have heard of dopamine, helps control the brain's reward and pleasures. So these are different, or norepinephrine or serotonin. So these are different neurotransmitters. Many drugs work by altering the action of these neurotransmitters in your brain. So hence why some people do drugs. So this is an example of how cocaine or dopamine can remain in the synapse much longer than normal, causing a happy, euphoric feeling. Obviously, I don't recommend that you do drugs, but this is like the neuropathway, how it affects the brain. So also food can be addictive for some people. So some people have a reaction, like people that are addicted to chocolate might have a dopamine response when they actually eat the chocolate, as an example. Obviously, cocaine is much stronger and potent, and yes, you can OD from it, and yes, it can cause permanent damage and many other horrible side effects. Okay, so there's different types of neurons as well. We have a bipolar neuron or interneuron, unipolar sensory neuron, and a multipolar motor neuron. Where do you think you'll find these types of neurons in the body? So sensory neurons are transmit impulses from receptors to the CNS or central nervous system. So your brain and spinal cord, sometimes called afferent neurons. Motor neurons transmit impulses from the CNS to effectors, sometimes called efferent neurons, and interneurons called within the CNS. So these transmit impulses between sensory and motor neurons. So from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so now we have a reflex arc. And this is for quick reflexes. So a reflex in a newborn, involuntary automatic response to a stimulus. So this occurs so quickly because the nerve impulse never reaches the brain. So here you're going to see the nerve never goes to the brain. It just goes to the spinal cord, and then you have an automatic reaction. So this is showing an example of when the person reacts to a heat or a type of heat. So it travels from the receptor to the spinal cord to an effector. So this is here they give the examples like a knee-jerk response, blinking, when an object comes close to your eye or face. Okay, here's some nervous system disorders. Meningitis. So this is inflammation of the membranes that surround the brain and spinal cord, called meningitis or meninges. This is can be very serious. It can be deadly. This is caused by a viral or bacterial infection, basically in the brain, and very serious if left untreated. If you look up some videos of people that have suffered from severe meningitis, sometimes they'll have to amputate their arms and legs because your body's natural response is to save the core, right? The brain, your organs, and it'll stop sending blood to your like hands and feet. So it'll start dying, but it'll try and keep your core alive. So that is actually a side effect of severe meningitis. Stroke. So there's different types of strokes. You can hemorrhage, that's a blood vessel in the brain burst, or it can be an aneurysm. And ischemic, blockage of a blood vessel in the brain, cutting off oxygen supply. So this is the type of stroke, for example, that one of my grandfathers had, and he got to receive one of the drugs we make at Genentech called TPA. And if you have the drug within 24 hours, it'll actually break up the blockage in the blood vessel and save the person's life. Now, you don't want to give that drug to someone that's having a hemorrhage because it'll make it worse. So that's why you need to know, if there's a medical emergency, what type of stroke that the person is having. So a stroke can cause brain damage, such as abnormal motor functions, paralysis, and even death. If a person is all of a sudden goes numb on one side of their body, their mouth is drooping, they're like, I don't know what's going on, you would really want to rush them to the emergency room, because if it's just on one side of their body, there's a likelihood it could be a stroke. Okay, so here's the hemorrhage. I always say this word wrong. I'm just going to call it hemorrhage versus ischemic. So this is showing in the enlarged blood vessel that may burst, causing the stroke. And then the ischemic is a blockage. So this little blockage, fatty tissue, or not tissue, but like a plaque, could break off from a different part of your body, travel through your circulatory system, and basically when it gets to the arteries or the blood vessels in your brain, they're smaller, and then it gets stuck. And then that's what causes the stroke. So that's why we, or people in the medical industry, encourage people to have good cardiovascular health so they don't build up as many of these plaques in their blood vessels, and they decrease the likelihood of stroke or heart attack. Okay, so polio. Polio has been nearly eradicated because now, as you can see here, we have a vaccine for it caused by a virus that attacks the central nervous system. And this is one of our presidents that had polio before the vaccine existed, and it actually made him lose function in his legs because it attacked his nervous system. So it can cause paralysis and loss of leg movement. And that is it. Hope you guys enjoyed the presentation and got all your notes done. And yeah, have a good day.